I took down my entire toxic family, exposed my father's shocking crimes, and discovered a betrayal that almost ruined my life forever. And I never thought I'd be that guy who ends up airing out family disasters on the internet. But here I am, typing this out because someone out there will get it. My name's Caleb. I'm 31, and I'm the oldest kid, only son, born into a family that loves appearances more than honesty. The kind of family that puts on this perfect picture for neighbors and distant relatives. But behind closed doors, it's all power plays, grudges, and secrets that go back decades. My dad Martin and my uncle Clay are the ringleaders, two men who would burn down the house if it meant having the last word. My mom, Janine, tries to smooth things over, always playing peacemaker, but I think even she's tired of pretending. My younger sister Tara avoids the fights when she can, usually hiding behind her phone, hoping no one notices her slipping away when things get tense. The family reunion that set this whole disaster in motion took place in a rundown lodge somewhere outside Asheville. One of those places that smells like mop water and bad coffee, no matter how much air freshener they use. It was 45 minutes from anything resembling civilization, so once you were there, you were trapped. I got there late, stuck behind some farmer hauling a trailer full of hay down a one-lane road, but I wasn't exactly eager to arrive early anyway. As soon as I stepped inside, I could feel the tension clinging to the walls. People were clustered in little groups, cousins scrolling through their phones, aunts comparing who got their kid the most expensive birthday gift. Martin was already holding court at the drinks table, whiskey in hand, voice loud enough that you could hear him across the room. Clay hovered nearby, smirking like he was in on some joke no one else understood. I grabbed a drink, kept my head down, and tried to pretend I wasn't there. Tara gave me a half-hearted wave, her fingers still flying over her phone screen, probably texting some friend about how miserable she was. Janine shot me one of her looks, the kind that says, "Please don't make a scene. Not today." I nodded to her, but I could already feel it coming. Martin wasn't going to let me off that easy. After about 20 minutes of this awkward small talk and forced smiles, someone clinked a glass and said Martin wanted to say a few words. I braced myself, knowing where this was heading. Martin started off with some rambling nonsense about family values and tradition, but then his tone shifted. He started talking about how some people in the family don't know how to make good choices. He kept glancing at me, like daring me to interrupt, but I stayed quiet, waiting to see how far he'd take it. Martin didn't disappoint. He launched into this speech about responsibility, about how it's a shame when the older kids set a bad example for the younger ones. The room went dead silent except for the sound of someone's kid dropping a plastic fork on the tile floor. Then Martin pointed at me, literally pointed, like we were in a school assembly and I'd been caught sneaking out of class. He said I was the family's biggest disappointment, said I'd failed at everything I touched, and embarrassed him more times than he could count. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose it. I raised my glass, took a slow sip, and grinned. I told him it took one to know one, didn't it? Considering he was the one who'd spent years embezzling from his own company to cover his gambling debts. The room froze. Clay let out this bark of a laugh, but it was shaky, like he wasn't sure whether to be amused or horrified. Then he tried to pile on, calling me a fraud, a nobody who liked to play at being important. He said I was pretending to be successful when I was nothing but a leech. I didn't say anything at first. I just smiled wider, reached into my coat, and pulled out a folder I'd been carrying around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. I slid it across the table toward Clay, the sound of paper against wood loud in the silence. Clay hesitated, then grabbed it and started flipping through. Inside were loan agreements, property records, everything that proved he no longer owned his house, because I did. I reminded him of that fact, my voice calm, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The look on his face was worth every second of the years I spent preparing for this. Martin went pale, then red, then pale again. He opened his mouth, probably to yell, but Janine stepped between us, hands out like she could hold back the storm. She begged him not to do this here, not in front of everyone. Martin slammed his glass down so hard on the counter it cracked, then shoved past her and stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. The whole room sat there, stunned, nobody quite sure what to do next. My cousin Scott, who only married into the family last year, actually asked if this was real or if I was just being dramatic. Clay kept staring at the papers like they might catch fire if he looked long enough. I finished my drink, nodded at Janine, and walked out without another word, the night air cold and quiet after the chaos inside. 3 days after that disaster of a reunion, I woke up feeling strangely calm, like the storm had finally passed and left behind nothing but silence. I went about my usual morning routine, scrolling through messages, making coffee, and watching the sun creep through the blinds, all while knowing today was the day I'd finally pulled the trigger on everything I'd been holding back for years. My phone buzzed every few minutes with new messages from family members who had somehow decided that the best way to fix things was to guilt trip me into forgetting what happened. Janine sent a long text that read like a monologue from a soap opera, begging me to reconsider before I did anything I couldn't undo, saying Martin hadn't meant what he said and that Clay was just upset. She didn't even bother denying anything, just asked me to think of the family and what I was doing to it. Martin's message was shorter, colder, and so typical of him that I almost laughed. He wrote, "If you want to stay in this family, fix this, no punctuation, no greeting, no signature, just that," as if he still thought he could order me around like I was 16. I didn't bother replying because I knew it wouldn't matter what I said. The group chat was a mess, filled with Tara trying to play mediator, cousins choosing sides, and Clay completely absent, probably too busy trying to figure out how to dig himself out of the hole he'd fallen into. His wife, Deborah, on the other hand, was flooding the chat with passive-aggressive prayers and heart emojis, as if emojis could erase the fact that they'd been freeloading off me for years. By midday, I'd had enough of the noise. I sat down at my desk, opened the folders I'd been keeping for this exact moment, and started sending out the paperwork. I contacted my lawyer, the same one who handled the transfer of Clay's house, and gave the green light to proceed with the foreclosure. I gathered the documents related to Martin's secret investment accounts, the ones he thought I didn't know about, the ones he had stupidly put under my name because he needed someone clean to hide the money. I called the bank, flagged the accounts, and initiated the process to freeze them. The woman on the phone kept calling me sir and honey in the same breath, which was weirdly comforting in the middle of all this. By the time dinner rolled around, I'd set in motion everything I'd planned for years, and I sat there eating leftover pasta like it was just another Tuesday. I didn't tell anyone right away because I wanted them to feel it first, to wake up and realize that the world had shifted and they couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. The next morning, I woke up to a dozen missed calls and a string of texts that ranged from pleading to furious. Clay tried to call twice, then switched to texts, saying I was ungrateful, that I wouldn't have anything if it weren't for him and Martin, that I was tearing the family apart for no reason. Deborah left a voicemail that started off sounding tearful, but turned into a lecture about loyalty and respect, as if either of them had ever shown me any. Martin showed up at my apartment, parked outside for nearly half an hour before he worked up the nerve to get out of his car and buzz my unit. I watched him from the window, arms crossed, pacing like a caged animal, finally coming up and banging on my door like he could still intimidate me. When I opened the door, he didn't even try to hide his anger. He told me I was ruining everything, that I didn't understand what I was doing, that I was embarrassing him in front of people who mattered. I told him he'd embarrassed himself long before I ever stepped in. He tried to shove me, just enough to see if I'd flinch, but I stood my ground and told him if he tried that again, I'd have the building manager file a trespass report. He backed off because there were people watching from the balconies, neighbors who'd probably heard every word, and Martin couldn't stand being seen as anything less than perfect. After he left, I sat down and looked at the flood of messages still coming in. Tara was begging me to stop, saying Janine was crying, that Martin was in one of his moods, that I was pushing them too far. I didn't answer because I didn't believe her. Cora sent me a playlist with no explanation, her way of saying she couldn't handle the tension but wasn't brave enough to pick a side. The family group chat fell into chaos. Cousins who'd barely spoken to me in years suddenly had opinions, telling me I should let it go, that I didn't have to do this, that I was becoming as bad as Martin. Others sent private messages quietly supporting me, saying they admired what I was doing but couldn't say it out loud. The thing that stuck with me most wasn't the anger or the threats or even the begging. It was the silence that crept in when they realized I wasn't backing down. That moment where they had to face the truth that for once I wasn't going to be their punching bag or their shield. I was done playing the part they wrote for me, and they didn't know how to handle it. The first sign that things were about to get uglier came when Clay decided to stop pretending he could reason with me and instead went straight for legal games. I got a certified letter delivered to my door, the kind that makes your stomach clench even though you know exactly what's inside before you open it. He was disputing the foreclosure, claiming the loan agreement had been a misunderstanding, that it was never intended to be enforced, and that I was somehow manipulating the situation for my own gain. I almost laughed out loud sitting at my kitchen table because the man had signed those documents with his own hand, had thanked me more than once for giving him extra time when he fell behind, and had sent me a damn Christmas card saying how grateful he was that I hadn't kicked him out already. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who didn't seem the least bit concerned, just told me it was another stalling tactic, another desperate attempt to buy time they didn't have. Meanwhile, Martin was playing a different game. He started showing up again at my apartment, first just sitting in his car like he might work up the courage to come inside, then eventually coming up and banging on my door like he owned the place. The second time he pushed his way into my entryway without waiting for me to invite him, and when I tried to block him, he shoved me hard enough that I stumbled back against the wall. I warned him right there, told him if he ever tried that again, I'd call the building management and have him banned from the property. His face turned bright red, fists clenched, like he was holding back every ugly thing he wanted to say or do. But the sound of a neighbor opening their door across the hall snapped him out of it. He left in a storm of slammed doors and tires squealing out of the lot, just like a kid throwing a tantrum. Every day felt like another round of the same fight. I kept getting calls from numbers I didn't recognize, voicemails from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting to give their 2 cents. Some of them begged me to reconsider, saying this wasn't worth tearing the family apart. Others took Martin's side, calling me selfish, saying I was humiliating them all. Clay tried getting sneaky, sent someone claiming to be a property consultant to my building to offer some kind of deal, but when I looked up the contact info, it was just a fake number routed through a voicemail service. I forwarded it all to my lawyer, made sure to keep the receipts, because if there was one thing I learned from my family, it was to always have proof. Deborah started leaving me voicemails that swung wildly between sobbing pleas about how I was making them homeless and furious rants about how heartless I was, as if switching tactics would make me crack. Janine kept texting, saying she was tired, that she didn't know what else to do, that she just wanted peace. Tara tried to act like she was neutral, but the longer it went on, the more obvious it became that she was angling to protect Martin and Clay, trying to convince me I was being cold and vindictive. Every time I read one of their messages, every time I heard their voices begging or threatening, I reminded myself of all the times they let Martin humiliate me, all the times they watched Clay take advantage of me, all the times I was the joke at family dinners so they could feel better about themselves. When Clay's stalling failed and the foreclosure notice was finalized, things really started to fall apart. He and Deborah packed up in the dead of night, leaving the place a wreck, like trashing it on the way out would somehow make it mine. Martin tried one last time to get Janine to intervene, sent her over to beg me face to face, but I wouldn't open the door. I wasn't going to sit there and let them use her as a pawn, not again. The group chat that had once been filled with birthday announcements and vacation photos was dead now, just a graveyard of old messages no one wanted to scroll back through. The cousins who'd told me privately they supported me stayed silent in public. The ones who had called me heartless unfriended me or blocked my number, like that would change anything. Even Tara, who always claimed she just wanted to stay out of the drama, couldn't help herself. She sent me a long message late one night, saying Martin was struggling, that Clay was devastated, that I'd made Janine sick with stress, that it wasn't too late to undo everything. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I told her she could have spoken up at the reunion, she could have stopped Martin from humiliating me, she could have told Clay to pay what he owed. She left the message on read, didn't say another word. The silence from her said more than anything she might have written. It was strange how quiet everything became after that. I stopped hearing from most of them. Martin stopped showing up at my door. Clay stopped sending threats. It was like they finally realized I wasn't going to change my mind, and the only thing left was to deal with the consequences they'd spent years trying to avoid. But even in the quiet, I knew it wasn't over. Not really. Not with this family. They were just biding their time, waiting for the next opening, the next chance to twist the knife. And I was ready for them, because this time, I wasn't going to let them catch me off guard. The day Clay and Deborah finally had to hand over the keys, I couldn't stop myself from driving by their house just once, not because I wanted to gloat, but because after everything, I needed to see it was really happening. When I pulled up across the street, I saw the moving truck parked crooked in the driveway, the back doors wide open, boxes piled carelessly like they'd packed in a panic. Deborah was shouting at Clay, her voice loud enough that I could hear every bitter word even with the windows rolled up. Clay noticed me almost immediately, his face twisted with fury, and without missing a beat, he flipped me off like that would somehow change anything. I didn't react the way I thought I would. I didn't feel smug or victorious. I just raised a hand, gave him a small wave, and drove off, leaving them to deal with the mess they'd made. Martin wasn't done trying to pull the strings behind the scenes. He called Janine the same night, trying to convince her to beg me one more time, as if I hadn't already heard everything she had to say. She called me late, voice thin with exhaustion, telling me she just wanted peace, that she didn't know what else to do anymore. I told her it was already over, that the peace she was chasing didn't exist, not in this family, not with everything they'd done. She didn't argue, just hung up, and that was somehow worse than if she'd yelled at me. The group chat, once noisy with holiday plans and birthday wishes, was nothing but dead air now. No one wanted to be the first to break the silence because it would mean acknowledging how broken everything really was. Over the next few weeks, the legal side of things dragged on longer than I expected, because of course Clay tried one more time to stall the sale of the house. His lawyer sent letters claiming he'd been negotiating with me, that I'd promised to work out a payment plan, that this was all just a misunderstanding that could be resolved if I'd only come to the table. I didn't respond because there was nothing to say. I let my lawyer handle it, forwarded every fake offer, every last-minute plea, and watched as the house finally went up for sale. Clay and Deborah had no choice but to turn over the keys, and the day it officially listed, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the email from the agent, feeling nothing but a strange kind of relief. Martin, on the other hand, was spiraling. He started showing up at my building again, pounding on the front door, shouting for me to come out. One night he brought a folder of paperwork, some desperate attempt to make me back down, but I refused to let him in. He stood outside, banging on the door so hard the neighbor from across the hall yelled at him to knock it off. Martin cursed at him, slammed his car door, and tore out of the parking lot like a teenager who'd just lost an argument. I think that was the moment I finally saw how small he really was, without all the bluster and fake respectability, just a bitter man who'd spent his life trying to control everyone around him and couldn't stand the idea that someone had stood up to him. The cousins I thought might have had my back mostly disappeared. A few sent awkward messages, half-hearted attempts at staying neutral, saying things like, "I hope this all blows over soon," or, "You know we love you both." Others went silent, probably hoping if they stayed out of it, they wouldn't end up in the crossfire. A couple even had the nerve to send me requests on Venmo for the cost of a group gift we bought together last year, as if that would somehow balance the scales. The only one who kept reaching out was Tara, but even she seemed more interested in easing her own guilt than fixing anything real. She sent me a long message saying family was about forgiveness, about loyalty, about not letting things get this far. I didn't reply because we both knew she'd stayed silent when it mattered most. What caught me off guard was how many people didn't choose a side at all. I thought the family would go full scorched earth, that everyone would rush to defend Martin and Clay, but instead most of them just faded out, unfriending me quietly on social media, stepping back without a word. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they just didn't want to get involved. Either way, it showed me exactly who they were, and I realized I didn't miss them at all. The weirdest part was the quiet that followed. After all the noise, the threats, the begging, it felt strange not to have my phone buzzing every hour with another message or call. I started sleeping better, eating better, even started going out again without worrying about running into someone who'd want to corner me for a lecture. I knew Martin wasn't done, not really, because someone like him doesn't just give up. I saw his car drive past my building more than once, slowing down like he thought he might catch me off guard. But I didn't react. I didn't care anymore. Whatever he was plotting, I was ready. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next blow to land. I was done letting them dictate how I lived, and no tantrum or guilt trip was going to change that now. I thought I had finally reached the finish line, that everything was over and done, that the dust would settle and I could start rebuilding what little piece I had left. For a few brief weeks, it seemed like maybe that was true. The house went up for sale. Clay and Deborah moved in with one of her sisters in a different state. Martin stopped showing up at my apartment to shout through the door or leave angry letters under the mat. The family group chat remained dead, a virtual graveyard of awkward silences, unread messages, and the ghosts of holiday plans that would never happen again. Even Tara stopped texting as often, as if she realized nothing she could say would change the outcome, as if the fight had drained whatever energy she had left for trying to keep us all tethered together. But deep down, I knew better than to trust the quiet. I knew Martin well enough to know that a man like him never just fades into the background, never just accepts defeat. I had underestimated him once, and I promised myself I wouldn't make that mistake again. The first sign that my instincts were right came in the form of an anonymous email. It showed up in my inbox one night while I was catching up on work, the subject line simple and strange: "You should know." I almost deleted it, thinking it was just spam or another cousin trying to meddle without having the guts to put their name on it. But curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, what I saw made my blood run cold. Attached were records, real and detailed, showing that Martin hadn't just hidden investments in my name like I thought. He had funneled money through offshore accounts using my identity for years, long before I even suspected anything. There were wire transfers, shell company records, tax documents doctored to look legitimate, but obviously fake when you looked close enough. The kind of thing that could land someone in prison if they weren't careful, the kind of thing that could ruin a person's life if the wrong people saw it. Before I could even process what this meant, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in my gut told me to answer. It was an investigator from a federal agency, polite but firm, asking if I had time to come in for questioning regarding suspicious financial activity tied to my name. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Everything I had worked so hard to untangle, everything I had done to finally free myself from Martin's grip, and here I was, being pulled right back into his mess. I agreed to meet, because what else could I do? Running would only make it look worse. That night, I barely slept, lying awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every document, every decision, wondering how I hadn't seen this coming. The next morning, I sat in a bland office under bright lights while a man in a cheap suit asked me question after question about accounts I'd never touched, companies I'd never heard of, transactions I didn't recognize. I told them the truth, every detail I could remember, handed over the files I'd been sent, even offered to show them the years of paperwork I had from dealing with Martin's schemes. They seemed to believe me, or at least they didn't cuff me on the spot, but the investigation wasn't going away anytime soon. When I walked out of that office, I felt more exhausted than I had in years, like the weight of the entire family's sins had finally landed squarely on my back. A week later, Martin vanished. No warning, no goodbye, no last attempt to guilt me into bailing him out. He just disappeared, left behind an empty apartment, unpaid bills, and a trail of destruction that somehow still led back to me. Janine called me in tears, saying she didn't know where he'd gone, that she was worried sick, that maybe he'd done something to himself. I wanted to feel something, pity, anger, even satisfaction, but all I felt was hollow. Tara messaged me, demanding to know what I had done, as if I had orchestrated this final vanishing act, as if Martin hadn't been the one pulling the strings all along. I didn't bother replying. What was the point? They didn't want the truth. They wanted someone to blame, and I was the easiest target left standing. For a while, I tried to keep my head down, focused on clearing my name, on working with the investigators, on making sure every scrap of evidence pointed to Martin and not to me. But then, just when I thought it couldn't get any stranger, I received a letter postmarked from Mexico City, no return address, just my name written in Martin's familiar handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper, no explanation, No apology, nothing except for one line that chilled me to the bone. The game was never yours to win. I read that sentence over and over, the weight of it sinking in, realizing that even on the run, even after all this, he was still trying to keep the upper hand, still trying to remind me that he saw life as nothing but a series of battles to be won or lost. I sat there at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, trying to figure out what to feel. Part of me wanted to laugh at the sheer audacity of it. Part of me wanted to scream, to punch the wall, to burn that paper to ash and pretend none of it had ever happened. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of the games, tired of the drama, tired of being caught in the crossfire of a man who should have been a father but chose to be a tyrant instead. The investigation dragged on for months. Each meeting, each document, each interview another reminder that Martin had managed to hurt me one last time, even from thousands of miles away. The family stayed as fractured as it had been on that final day at the reunion. Janine kept her distance, too ashamed or too broken to call anymore. Tara posted cryptic quotes on social media about loyalty and betrayal, pretending she wasn't talking about me while making sure I saw every single word. Clay and Deborah stayed gone, too humiliated or too angry to ever reach out again. The group chat never came back to life, and honestly, I was glad. I didn't want their messages, their empty words, their fake apologies. I didn't want to hear them trying to rewrite history to make themselves the victims in a story they had written with their own hands. In the end, I didn't get some grand moment of closure or victory. There was no dramatic apology, no realization that they'd been wrong, no sudden reunion where we all hugged it out and pretended things could ever be normal again. What I got was silence, and in that silence, I finally found something close to peace. No more pretending, no more fighting battles that weren't mine to fight, no more carrying the weight of a family that never really had my back. The table was mine now, quiet and empty, but mine, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, that was enough.